The Diocese of Maitland-Newcastle is located on the traditional lands of the Awabakal, Biripi, Darkinjung, Milleroi, Wiradjuri, Wonnarua and Worimi people. Tonight, we acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as Australia's first peoples and the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we work to build a stronger, more equitable, kinder society that values children, young people, families and individuals. We honour the wisdom of and pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. We acknowledge their spiritual culture of all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples across Australia. I'd like to start tonight by saying thank you very much for joining us this evening. This free webinar for parents and carers is proudly hosted by the Diocese of Maitland-Newcastle's peak parent body, the Federation of P&F Associations. Before we get going, tonight's presentation will be recorded. And Madhavi's presentation will go for approximately 1 hour. Following the presentation, parents and carers will be invited to ask questions. You can ask a question via the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and you have the option to remain anonymous if you wish. We envisage tonight's proceedings will wrap up at around 8:30 p.m. and early next week, everyone who registered for this event will be sent an email that includes a link to tonight's presentation. Introducing you all now to Madhavi Nawana Parker. Madhavi is one of Australia's leading experts on mental health and wellbeing and the director of Positive Minds Australia. Her evidence-based programs are implemented throughout Australia and overseas, providing over 2 decades of contribution to her field, positively impacting thousands of young, disconnected and vulnerable young people. Thank you, Madhavi.
Thank you so much, Lizzie, for your lovely introduction. It's so wonderful to be here with all of you. Hopefully you can see my camera is now on, and I'm just going to share my screen with all of you folks. Here we go. Hello, Lizzie, if I can just have confirmation from you that everybody can see the screen and that we've got everyone here and I'm connected, we can get started.
Yes, you're right to go. Thank you.
Wonderful. Hello, parents and carers. It's a real privilege and joy to be here online with you tonight. We'll have plenty of time following this presentation for you to ask some questions. So feel free to take some notes along the way. And as Lizzie mentioned, to send through a message. Otherwise, in an hour or so, we'll take some live questions. So I'm really pleased that we're covering this topic together. You know, when we look at children's happiness and resilience, when we look at the research around the world about what it is that improves someone's sense of well-being and connection to themselves and happiness, we know it always comes down to relationships and having really good quality relationships. So if we want our children to be happier, we want to support them to build good friendships. If we want our children to feel more engaged at school, we want to support them with their friendships. If we want our children to do better at school, we want to connect them with better friendships and the skills we need. So the research is loud and clear that friendships really do matter. And I think the really tricky thing for us as parents, particularly those of you who are just starting out with school, is all of a sudden so much is happening for your child. You know, they've only been alive for 5 years. And even those of you with your 12-year-olds, they've only been alive for 12 years. And what this means for our young people is they're largely going out into the social world, so school, really inexperienced about how to get along with people, how to manage their feelings when somebody upsets them. And because our brain's job is not to keep us happy, it's actually to keep us safe, when our children get upset in a friendship, they get really big feelings. And when we look at what happens when someone's feelings get big, when a child is feeling emotional, their thinking gets small, so they can't think straight. And so our dear little ones are off and out there in the yard. We're not there to support them and guide them. And for the very first time, they're hearing feedback from their peers. Sometimes people are not wanting to play with them. Sometimes they just say something that's a bit socially clumsy and they get misunderstood. And our poor little people are really overwhelmed by this. And that's when sometimes they might say something or their friends might say something that leads to some conflict or sort of some social challenges. So the first thing I want us to all really keep in mind is it's actually really normal for our children to have some difficulties in these areas as they find their place, figure it all out, and just get more experienced. So we hang in there, we support them. And I think, you know, once they start, it's really important for us to remember we're neurobiologically hardwired to protect our young. And so when our children are upset, we will naturally become upset with them. And so why I'm sharing this with you is sometimes our children will come and tell us things about what's going on in their friendships, something that's upset them, and it will very quickly upset us as well because we want to protect them from pain, from suffering. And as a species, you know, we're pleasure seekers and pain avoiders. And so when it comes to our children, as they enter the school age years, we want to try really hard to start focusing more on our capacity to hear them out and listen more than we talk and advise. Now, this doesn't mean we don't give advice because we've all lived for a lot longer than our children. I have 3 children of my own and have been working with children over these last 2 decades. Now, we have all this knowledge, don't we? And that can be what's so hard when you're with your child. They're telling you all of this and you know the answer. You know exactly what needs to happen. You instantly want to talk to their teacher or get to the bottom of things or, you know, really be there for them in the most supportive way you can. And yet what we really want as our children enter school is to start seeing themselves as experts in their lives and people who are capable of taking a moment to feel the feels, tell us about what's going on. And often just by telling us, they're processing their emotions, they're getting it out of their head, they're hearing it again while they're in the presence of a loving adult, you know, their parent or carer. And sometimes that's actually enough for them and they can go back in there and reset and continue to develop that friendship. If we notice patterns and things get really difficult again and again, we're hearing the same things, of course, then we want to find out more, perhaps check in with their school, check in with their teachers, and really start noticing, is this affecting my child's ability to sleep? Are they looking stressed about being at school? And find out more. But initially, we just want to remember that it takes a lot to be a child in primary school, and it takes a lot of energy to navigate friendships. And so when people are having difficulty with their friendships, what will happen is they will need some support from an adult. So I want you to remember this. You're not meant to know all of the answers, all right? And this takes me to my first slide. About 10, 15, 20 years ago, actually 18 years ago, because our oldest child is 18 now and our youngest is 10, I was a parenting expert who didn't have any children. So I knew everything about parenting, right? I had all the answers because I was operating off what I knew from other people's children, from what I knew about reading it. But then I went through the actual experience and I started my own family. So here I am in labour. Not really. Is this possibly anybody in labour? I don't know. I don't think so. But I went through the experience and I had an actual child, and I do have a Canva membership, folks. It's just that I'm a bit rubbish with technology. So you'll see some crisscrosses here and there. Obviously not my actual baby for very obvious reasons. So had the actual baby, had the actual child, they cry. They don't do all of the things in the book, no matter what you do to settle. And sometimes when you're thinking, I just want to go to the supermarket to have a little rest, because that sounds like a fun activity because I'm just doing this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They don't like that either, do they? And then you think, oh my goodness, what's going on? So maybe what I'll do is I'll have another one. I'll have another one. But then you suddenly realize they don't always get along. And for those of you who have more than one child, I think sibling conflict would be very familiar to you. The only solution that we can see from the research around the world for that one, folks, is to just stop at one. And here's the thing with siblings, they're practice, siblings and close family friends for the children who don't have siblings in their home, who are only children. They're the experiment, right? Children use their families, their siblings, the people in their close social circle as practice on how to navigate the social world. So they tend to be a little bit more extreme. And of course, what we know is siblings will tell each other in no uncertain terms when a social boundary has been crossed. So there's actually a real function to this. And sometimes it can get really tricky. And we want to make sure, as we teach our children how to have healthy friendships outside of the home, that this sibling conflict doesn't then go into the next level of conflict where there's intentional mean on purpose, but also a degree of intentional harm and put downs that would come into that bullying category that we'll talk about more as we go on. And why I say this is, sometimes when a child is having difficulty at school or difficulty in another context, they can really use their siblings as a bit of a punching bag, as an opportunity to just get that emotion about. And you might even feel that as a parent, that, you know, when you hear your school talking about your child, they're like, oh my gosh, they're amazing, they're perfect, they get along with everyone, we have no trouble, they're focused, they concentrate, they do all of this stuff. And then you're thinking, okay, you're talking about the same child. The thing is sometimes we carry the brunt of all of the things that are hard and complex for them because we're their safe space. So just keep those things in mind as we go on, that children will come to us with their alarm because we'll listen and we love them. And that's exactly what we're supposed to do, is be that person in their life that's able to listen and able to support and able to care. But because they come to us as young people with really big emotions, and they have a tendency sometimes to overestimate what's happened or to talk about it bigger than it actually is, our alarm can get activated. And there are these really tricky things, and it happens to our children in their friendships as well, but also to us as parents, that when our children come to us with distress, when they come to us with upset, and this is also like when you're just asking them to put their shoes on and it's like 8:03 and you really need to get out the door, and like they're half naked and like nothing's going on, and then someone's saying, she looked at me funny and that person looked at me funny, and all of this is going on. In that moment, the mirror neurons in our brain, so a bit like if you've ever seen that show, Australia's Funniest Home Videos, and like you're watching the thing and the thing is about to happen and your heart rate's racing as if you're there. You're not there, but you're feeling all the feels, and then the thing happens and you're like, oh, you're really, really feeling it all. You're not experiencing the thing, but the mirror neurons in your brain are giving you the signals into your emotions that you're actually going through that. And that's why sometimes we can raise our voice at our kids and get a bit grumpy with them, because they come to us with their grumpy and we catch some grumpy from them. And so this contagion of emotion that happens in all of our families and is a very normal part of living in a social group can really affect our judgment when our children come home and talk about these things. And some of us will go, you know what, maybe I just need a third, I'll just have another one and see if that helps. So on it goes. And why I share this is just important to remember there's so many directions you can go with supporting your child with their friendships and supporting your child when they're having challenges socially with other people. So always keep that in mind. You don't have to have the answers. You're allowed to say, I need some time to think about it, and say things like, I'm so glad you told me about this, because all of this background information is really, really important for your child as they start to develop the skills to be the experts in their life and to develop these skills in friendship, which we know will give them that really solid foundation for their happiness, their resilience, and their social emotional well-being. So 5-year-olds to 12-year-olds have really got their learners' plates on, folks. They're trying everything out and they're going to make mistakes. And so are the children they go to school with. This is so normal. And, you know, even for us as adults, you know, I know for me as a parent and in any context, you know, we make mistakes. A lot of this is trial and error. We're going through so many things for the first time. And so we want to help our children understand and normalize that in friendships, things won't always go smoothly. And if we're role modeling and teaching the underlying message of kindness, so that value of treating other people with kindness and compassion, you can't go wrong with kindness, right? And so when that's the foundation, what we know is our children start to really develop an ability to see other people's perspectives. And when we look at friendship skills, one of the most crucial things to be a good friend is to be able to see things from another person's perspective. But of course, when you're young, you are going to feel the feels and mostly see it from what you're going through. But as parents, we can really support the development of our children's emotional intelligence by helping them understand things like, you know, every kid in your class actually wakes up just like you do with their families, really wanting to have a good day. And this is a little compassion technique. It's just the reminder, and it's the same for us as adults, isn't it? We all just wake up wanting to have a good day. And we're a social species. We want to get along with people. And look, if you're a big introvert, you want to get along with people, but you just don't want massive amounts of people around you all the time. You need time to step away and rest and rejuvenate. And if you're an extrovert, you get a lot of your energy from socializing and interacting. So we're all on this spectrum. But what we want our children to really understand as they're developing their friendship skills is that foundation of compassion and kindness, that every child around you, no matter how difficult they are to be with, because school's so tricky for our children. They come from the family unit, they come from places where there are more adults around to support them, to suddenly one teacher in a room with 32 kids sometimes, right? And so the teacher is hugely outnumbered, doing this extraordinary job co-regulating. And what I mean by co-regulating, many of you will already know, simply means our children co-process emotions with us. So they borrow our calm to get calm themselves. And I reckon that's one of the hardest things in parenting is when your mirror neurons are activated, or when you're worried about your child, sometimes it's hard to keep you cool. And then, of course, it's very hard for your child to get cool because they can't be what they can't see, and they're looking for that calm. And so when your child is in a classroom with a whole bunch of other children all around them, what this can mean is a whole bunch of things will happen, and there's no way they can possibly get along with every single child in that classroom. And while that's really difficult, and we want them to come home and debrief with us about these things and let us know how they're feeling, we want to do more listening than advising and talking. And the reason for this is it's actually really normal not to like everybody that you meet. And it's also really normal for not everybody to like us when they meet us. And so it's important for our dear children to understand that this is a normal thing. So we want to keep things really realistic in the social world, because all the difficulties they'll have along the way is practice for the workplace, practice for, for high school, practice for later on in life, is that ability to tolerate and manage your frustrations and be flexible and adaptable when you're not getting along with everybody around you, and to know that that is normal. Because otherwise, if we feel like we should get along with everyone and everybody should always be including us, it's just not how the world actually will work for us. And what we see is later on in teenagehood and early adulthood, those skills aren't there to be able to go, oh, hang on a sec, there's, you know, I don't have to take it personally that this person hasn't included me, or I don't have to take it personally that we don't get along, but we can still work together on a team, or we can still play together on the same soccer team. And that ability to understand that all the people we don't get along are often our greatest teachers, and there are so many opportunities to learn from not having a perfect relationship with another person. So that's separate to the bullying piece. But what's really interesting is we know that children who have a tendency to have high degrees of emotionality, so the kids that are just deep feelers, deep thinkers, carry absolutely everything on their shoulders, really think about it and rehash it again and again. They have that extra layer of anxiety in their neurological makeup. You know, those little ones, what happens for them is they carry all of that around with them, and they can't, you know, relax and sort of just go with the flow. And we can see for so many of the young people who do have that higher level of sensitivity that they're more likely to assume that when a child says something socially clumsy or something happens that they're not comfortable about, that they're going to assume that it was done intentionally. So it was done intentionally to harm. So the more sensitive kids can sometimes misinterpret it, because as a species, we're meaning makers. So say a child has said, I'm going to meet you at the monkey bars at recess time, and they agree on this, right, in the morning. And all of a sudden they get to the monkey bars and the other kid's not there. Now, a deeply sensitive kid, and really most kids, if you're between 5 and 10, right, because they're so young and inexperienced, they're going to start trying to make meaning of that. Like, they didn't come, they don't like me anymore, they're playing with someone else, you know, they're being mean to me. Oh, and then they see them talking to someone else, they're talking about me behind my back. They can sometimes have some of those thinking mistakes, the future predicting, the mind reading, all of those sorts of things that the more sensitive, anxious kids can sometimes do, which is about 50% of kids, by the way. So, you know, these aren't bad things. These are actually really lovely qualities to be a deep thinker and a deep feeler, but it can be really tricky when it comes to friendships. So we just want to help children understand that most of the time, you know, mean on purpose is actually less common than social clumsiness. A lot of the time, you know, children who are intentionally coming to hurt someone have usually got some, you know, real difficulties that are going on in the background that they need support in. Most of the time, it's just, I feel a bit mad, and now I've said this thing that's a bit like that. And then afterwards they're thinking, oh, I wish I hadn't said it. Or sometimes kids with attention disorders, for example, or just kids who are still developing their impulse control, can just say something and then realize after it's come out of their mouth, oh, what did I say? Or they might accidentally throw a ball. It looks like they've thrown it deliberately into someone's face. Everyone starts getting mad at them. They get really worked up and upset about it. And then things can start to spiral really quickly. So as coaches to our children, we listen and then we observe as well. So sometimes, you know, we might be in the supermarket or out on the sports field, and we can say to our children, oh, that looks like both of them think they're right. And this is really tricky because neither of them can really think about how the other person's feeling. And you're a bit like Peppa Pig, you know, narrating the narrator in Peppa Pig that goes, you know, Daddy Pig is feeling very grumpy because Mummy Pig wants him to look at a map, but Daddy Pig thinks he can find his way to the top of the hill, right? And what that's doing for children, you know, it's why children's shows often have that, is it just helps them make sense of what's going on. But what we want to be careful about is not adding new information and not asking too many questions. We want to get really good in school age at listening, and we can say things like, that sounds really hard, or that sounds like a hard problem to solve, sweetheart. Or, you know, I'm so glad you told me. And then we want to say, you know, what do you think will help? And let them do some thinking for themselves. And that doesn't mean they'll know. And they might say, I don't know, what should I do? And in a case like that, you use your parenting intuition and you follow your gut. And it's okay to advise and support. So remember, you're the expert on your child. And so it's really, really important when we look at what I'm sharing with you, it's a framework for you to tailor to your child's needs. So we'll continue along and we'll talk very briefly about what goes up in our heads. Now, it's really good for your children to understand that we're thinkers as a species, and thoughts come with automaticity. So we get 70 to 80,000 thoughts a day, right? And they're automatic. They're just coming in. And back when we were cave people, we had the amygdala. They were there, these two parts of the brain that are there to look out for saber-toothed tigers. And of course, we don't have saber-toothed tigers anymore, but we still have problems, right? We have social problems. We have, some children are struggling with their learning. Some children are struggling with stuff that's going on in their personal lives. Some are struggling with other things. And so what happens when we wake up in the morning, or even when we're trying to go to sleep at night, when the busyness isn't there, we are left with our thoughts. And if we're struggling socially, if we're struggling with our friendships, if someone is being unkind to us, if we're feeling excluded, if we're struggling to make friends, which is so incredibly hard, what will happen is the thoughts are all going to be tracking what's wrong in our life. All right. So we start to negative track our life, negative track our friendships. So our children can start to say, I have no friends. Nobody likes me. But what's actually happened is there's 1 or 2 kids or 3 kids that they're really struggling to get along with, who aren't being particularly kind or aren't including them, but they're getting stuck thinking about that. And then as meaning makers, we continue to add details. And what we want to be careful of is that they don't miss all of the things that are going well, and that they aren't focusing enough attention on the friendships that are constructive and mutually respectful and mature enough for their age, and all of those things. So we just want to help them understand they don't have to believe everything they think, and they don't know for sure what another person is thinking. So that future predicting that, we can all do, or that mind reading where it's like, oh, they look like they're talking, I bet they're saying that they're not going to invite me to the birthday party that's coming up. These things come from the natural worries that we have as a species. So we want to really equip our children and coach them on all these skills that sit on the periphery of having the foundation for friendships, so that they understand what's actually going on, and they develop that self-awareness as to why they might feel a bit icky in their friendships. So with all of this going on, this is just a little reminder in the middle of our conversation to look after yourself, because there is nothing like this. There is nothing like parenting and caring for a young person to consume your mind. There are so many decisions that we need to make, and quite often we'll find ourselves in decision fatigue, and those stress levels are really important for us to do whatever we can. And I know it's hard. We're often outnumbered. We often aren't just parents. We're a whole bunch of other things to other people. Some of us work and have those responsibilities. So there's all of these things that we're trying to manage in the background. So this is just your reminder to remember, we're all in this together. It's not going smoothly in every house by any means. And to just make sure that we don't get so invested in thinking, I've got to fix this, I've got to sort this out, this shouldn't be happening. These are normal things that happen for our children, and we'll be able to talk about more specific things as we go along. So I'd like you to think, when you're talking to your children, we talked about the contagion of emotion just a moment ago, about how if your children are really stroppy and they're in a really bad mood and they're losing the plot, you will very quickly start to escalate. Now, some of us are really good at escalating internally and keeping it looking cool as a cucumber, but most parents will really struggle with that until they've deliberately practiced that ability to be calm in the storm. We want to teach our children that exact same thing, that when you go to school, emotions are contagious. So everyone is learning how to be a good friend at your school. And so sometimes you'll get big feelings and small thinking, and your feelings might get big. And it's really important that you go and ask a teacher for help, or you do one of those things we've talked about that can help you get your feelings nice and calm again. But also remember, when other children are feeling really angry around you, or they're really cross about something, or they're saying you cheated, but you didn't cheat and you're really upset, you can catch their feelings from them. So really help your children to understand this contagion, this thing that goes back and forth, so they understand the importance of when someone is losing the plot, it's actually important to say, hey, I'm just going to go to the toilet, I'll be back, or I'm just going to get a drink of water, I'll be back. I'll come back when we're all calm, or teach them those skills depending on their age. And the earlier they know that, the earlier they start to develop those self-control skills. Now, while I'm here, because your children are so young, which I just love it when they're so young, because they're not exposed yet necessarily to mobile phones and social media and communicating with each other via text, because they're so young. And I understand that there are plenty of children in primary school that will need mobile phones for personal reasons in your family, and that's completely fine. The thing is we want to really make sure before they've got those devices that they understand that if they don't want to read something about themselves, they don't write it about another person. Poor young people, you know, back when I was young, and probably when you were young, there weren't mobile phones, right? And so if you had a conflict with a friend, you kind of just had a natural bit of space from them. So you could go home. And we know from the research, just having a bit of a break from somebody actually means that a little bit of time and space from another person will actually give you time to think it through, give you time to manage your emotions, and then come back with a much fresher mindset the next day. But what we try to advise children as soon as they've got a mobile phone, to make sure that they know that anything to do with solving a friendship difficulty should not be done via text. It should be done in person. There's two reasons for this. Via text, you can misunderstand information, and we see a lot of conflict, you know, in young people who are texting each other and getting very, very upset. But what we also know can happen is, you know, they can say something socially clumsy in the heat of the moment. And in the heat of the moment, there's this complete record of something they said, and everybody's looking at the thing that they said and judging it. And then other people get involved, and sometimes parents get involved. And then suddenly your child is perceived as a bully, and all they're doing is being their age and trying to navigate a little disagreement like they would in the yard, but now they've got an audience. And the third reason why we don't want them to solve friendship difficulties via text messages or via social media is it discourages the development of their courage and social emotional literacy skills to actually have these conversations face to face, looking someone in the eye. And if they don't need to know how to do that, you know, with someone coaching them and supporting them to communicate in a socially constructive way. Because, you know, what we see in the teenage years is children who haven't had that practice, or who too much in the habit of dealing these things. You know, sometimes, you know, we'll have year 11s and 12s crying their eyes out in our rooms because someone's broken up with them via text. Now, in the 70s, 80s, and the 90s, you couldn't break up with someone via text. You had to actually consciously think about their feelings, think about the fact you were going to tell them, I want to end this relationship. And you had to deliver that message in a kind and compassionate way. And so you got quite used to considering someone else's emotions. So it makes it a bit too easy, right? And it's easy when you're grumpy with someone to just say something online or just say something via text. So we just want to make sure our children know nice and young how to handle social situations, and to come and let you know if there's a message that's come in that's making them feel really uncomfortable. We want them to actually come in and be able to let us know about that, and for us to be able to listen to their ideas about how to do that through. And you can certainly have a look, on our website. I think you guys have a link to it at Positive Minds Australia. There's heaps of free resources there for you around friendships, around emotional regulation. And we know from the research, if we can just give kids as many different ideas on how to handle this stuff, and when they're upset, say, all right, well, let's have a look at what we've got. Do you think, what do you think is going to help? And again, coming back to, our children need to feel like they're the expert in their life. That's a really critical thing, that they feel like they know how to do friendship. If we have all the answers, if we are the ones giving all the guidance, even with our 5-year-olds, right? Because even at 5, if they come home and they say, so-and-so said my drawing was the ugliest drawing they've ever seen. Now, naturally, we get activated, we get upset, but our 5-year-old is just telling us something hard that happened. And if we can show that we understand that that's hard and we care about that being hard, but also normalize that children are all at a different point of psychological maturity, and then draw them back to, well, what did you think of your drawing, darling? And to really help them sort of see, well, it's actually their opinion that counts the most other than other people's. So we don't want to react more than is necessary, because then our children can become so reactive every time something doesn't go right socially. And yet it's just really normal. And particularly, when they hit year 3 and 4 and they reach this stage called individuation, where they're becoming their own person and they're really trying to feel like experts, you see a lot more social conflict start to peak then, and then it peaks again around year 6 and then again around year 9. So there are all of these different sort of social milestones and developmental milestones that come up. So this is just for a bit of fun. We're thinking about all this stuff. It's really intense. And I just wanted to say, it's big, isn't it? All these emotions. And while I joke here with this, we also want to remember as a species, when we have uncomfortable emotions, so when we are feeling uncomfortable or unhappy, what this means is we want to get rid of the icky feeling really quickly. We're not very good as a species at handling our emotions well. Now, some of us are better than others, absolutely. But generally speaking, what we tend to do is try to get rid of the feeling as quickly as we can in the easiest way possible. And sometimes that can be letting those emotions out on another person. And I think that's often what I see children doing with their parents. They're exhausted from school, or they might have a difficulty with their learning, or they might have some social challenges. They keep it all together nicely at school, and then they come home and completely lose the plot at home and dump it all over us. So do take care around that, and watch that mental load, watch that mental narrative, that meaning making. When our kids are losing the plot, if we're thinking, oh, I didn't have problems like this, or why are they like that, or I just asked them to get ready, or I ate everything that was on my plate, it starts to get this dialogue going, and whatever we think creates a feeling, and whatever that feeling is leads to a behavior. So remember, if they're losing it or they're struggling, to accept, okay, this is what's happening. It's not an emergency. My child is just really struggling at the moment, and I can handle this, because our confidence really, really matters. Now, this is missing the word empathy. So I don't know where that went on my slide. Forgive me. Again, not a stolen image from Canva, just me and my slide deck, and not doing these things necessarily perfectly here on the slide front. When your child starts school, and many of you, particularly those of you in those junior primary years, you will have noticed when it's another child's birthday party, a parent might send some cupcakes or some lollies, or by the third child for me, some caramel koalas purchased at the BP on the way into school. And you've got all of these lovely things that your child is walking out of the classroom as the bell goes. The child comes out, the bell is gone, and your child is holding on to this thing, and they're eating it slowly, and they're really enjoying it. They're like, this is the best thing I've ever eaten in my whole entire life. And the reason they're enjoying it so much is because their sibling doesn't have it, right? We've all been there. And the sibling's like, it's not fair. Why is this going on? And we're like trying to calm them down, like, oh, well, remember last week you had a cake pop, and then your brother didn't have a cake pop, or you know what, next week it might be your turn. And we're trying to explain like life is fair, but it actually kind of isn't. all our children need in these moments of emotionality, just like if it's a friendship difficulty, is someone to just show they care about the feeling and to not say too much about it. So, you know, in a moment like that, in one of those challenging moments like that, rather than saying too much or trying to make it okay, like we might sometimes do when they come to us with their friendship difficulties, we simply want to say, it is so hard to watch someone else eat something you really want to eat. I totally understand. And, you know, we can, otherwise we could also say, gee, you're feeling so jealous. And that's just how we feel. It's such a hard feeling, isn't it? When someone else has something you want. Now, this doesn't mean they then go, oh, thank you so much, Mummy. I'm feeling so regulated. I'm so glad you explained to me what was going on, because now I can completely handle my emotions. They'll still be upset. But what we're doing is we're developing and normalizing that we won't always feel great, that part of being human is sometimes we'll be unhappy, sometimes we'll be disappointed, sometimes we'll be jealous, sometimes we'll be frustrated. And this is part of the human condition. So we want to really support them to normalize that. We want to also remember, young people, this is what TVs looked like when I was a small child. It was not a smart TV. It was really, really easy for us to get off the television when there was only a handful of channels. Whereas we want to remember for our children today, one of the things that's making it harder for them to develop these social skills in real time with actual kids is we have this new constant bombardment. You can't watch a show without knowing what's coming up next. So as your children in the junior primary years and in the primary years start to get interested in technology, remember to go in with empathy. We can't assume that just because we're out there riding our BMX and having a good time, we can't assume for our dear children that it's easy enough for them to be able to get up and walk away from these things. So again, our empathy for them really, really matters. So the next thing I want us to look at is something called relational energy. So this is something we want to build in our children. So a little bit like the heliotropic effect in science, that sunflowers look to the light. When we look at people, we look for certain virtues, certain qualities in us. And that slide has dropped off, but I can share what they are. There are certain qualities that people look for in our children, in each other. And these qualities are kindness, the ability to encourage others, the ability to see things from other people's perspectives, the ability to practice honesty and fairness. Now, a 5-year-old is not going to have those skills, and nor is a 12-year-old. So no matter where you are along this spectrum of primary school, these are skills we want to develop, virtues we want to develop. So we want to keep making sure for our children that they are focusing on their character and their values when they're going out there into the friendship world. We know from the science around the world, if we're going to have the best chance of being a good friend, we want to be operating from character. So teaching our children character, teaching our children values about how we treat each other, how we handle a difficult person, how we handle a difficult situation is a really important thing for us to get. Now, for some children, friendships are really, really difficult. So we've got an expectation that they're going to go to school and they're going to get along, and we've got an expectation that other children will also be kind to them, especially when our children are kind and we've raised them to be kind. But one of the things we know when there's behavioural difficulties or friendship difficulties is sometimes there's a gap between where the expectations are and where the child's ability to meet those expectations are. So always remember to look for any hidden challenges that might be going on in the background for your children, and also for other people's children to understand what might be going on. Quite often it's just a missing skill, like not having that ability to regulate your emotions and handle your feelings. So keep that in mind as well. You know, we don't want to put out grass fires continually. We actually want to get underneath the bonnet and figure out what's going on when there are these challenges for our children. So we want to stay optimistic. It's really important, particularly for this generation who visually see on the news and on social media all the things that are going wrong in the world, we want to remember that our optimism in our children and our optimism in our children's ability to cope with different personalities, cope with friendship difficulties, cope with whatever comes their way, becomes their optimism in themselves to be able to do those things. So optimism can be taught and it can be role modeled. It's a really important thing because, you know, if your child is going through a difficult stage, they'll feel like when you've only been alive for 5 years or 10 years or 12 years, it feels like it'll always be like that. And that's just part of having a young, underdeveloped brain. So we want to help our children keep things in perspective so that they're not overestimating the difficulty of what is going on for them. So let's keep moving to the next slide. So we want to teach our children, and we also want to remember, because if your child is, you know, sometimes it's our child that might be doing the thing that we want them to correct, to remember that we all look bad sometimes. And we want to keep that in mind, that those mistakes are normal, and we want to help our children understand that for each other as well, to develop that compassion. And in those moments when they come to us with these difficulties, we don't want to get caught up in what do I say, what do I do? We just want to go, okay, what might be going on? What might be happening for my child? And to also remember to check in with our own emotions so that we can cope with and support them through it as well. Because remember, they borrow our calm to get calm. They can't be calm on their own. A young, underdeveloped brain, you know, unfortunately, until we're about 25 years of age, those skills around impulse control and managing our emotions are still pretty underdeveloped and still being developed. And then, of course, to remember that we're surrounding our children by lots of great friendship role models. So we know from the research for adults that we're about the average of the 5 people we spend most time with. We know that it really matters who our children are spending time with, and we can't always control that, folks. You know, the reality is once they start school, they're going to be exposed to a broad range of different personalities. And with that broad range of different personalities, sometimes they'll get along really, really well. Sometimes they won't. And that's normal. That's a learning opportunity. But we want to really think, okay, we know that people need at least 5 people who just like them for who they are. So maybe one of them will be at school and your child won't have massive social group. We just want to know they have at least one person there, that there's a mutually respectful, reciprocal thing going on, two-way relationship. But then we want to think about, okay, who's out in our community? Who have we got in our family friendship circle that are really nice kids for them to be around, really nice adults for them to be around, people who are kind, people who treat people in a really friendly way, people who don't talk about people behind their backs. You know, all of those sorts of things we want to really keep in mind, because they can't be what they can't see. So we want to really expose them to the right kind of people, and to really help our children, you know, if you have a neurodivergent child, to really help them find their people, find their tribe, look out for hobbies and things that really interest them, so that they can start to connect with other people and develop those social connections, because we need those connections for our happiness, to cope with life, to be more engaged at school, to be more engaged in life. It all comes back to friendships. And of course, friendships are the cause for the biggest feelings when you're a kid at school, right? When your friendships aren't going well, it's really hard to concentrate on your learning. It's really hard to concentrate on other things, because we're social beings. We want to know we belong. We want to know that people like us and accept us for who we are. And even though that's not possible all the time, we want to know at least there's some people that are feeling that way for us. So we've talked about this and that importance of co-regulation. Keep remembering they're going to come to us with stuff. We got to keep our cool, even though internally we're thinking, oh my gosh, this is horrible. How can someone say that to my beautiful kid? We got to keep regulated, because they're watching us. They're watching, oh my gosh, is this a disaster? Is this situation something that I can't cope with? Is this a situation that should never happen? And sometimes it should never happen, but a lot of the time it is what happens in schools as kids sort of figure out clumsy stuff. You know, sometimes I think back, I remember when I was 10, you know, my dad passed away and it was such a hard time, and kids had come up to me because I was so shocked by it. And I was in, year 5, would that be about right? Year 5 for 10. I've got a child who's 10, so in year 5. And kids just come up and go, is it true that your dad's really dead? And now that's not actually bullying. That's just kids asking you, how is that possible, in the socially immature way that children sometimes communicate. So just keeping that in mind for our kids, it's really important as well. I've got the power of music here because I think, you know, in all of this stuff, if your child is having difficulty socially, or they're being bullied, or they're having conflicts that they're struggling with, remember that it takes 0 seconds on an fMRI, not 0 seconds, sorry, for laughter, it takes 0 seconds on an fMRI scan of a brain to take someone from a state of stress into a state of joy. So laughter is a really powerful well-being buffer. So if your child is struggling, make sure they're watching funny shows on TV. Make sure there's enough room for silliness and fun. You're playing board games, you're mucking around, you're using your sense of humor, because when they're laughing enough, that 0 second effect is so powerful. It jumps their dopamine circuits with those feel-good neurotransmitters, which are really important for our brain health. And that means that we're optimizing, we're making the most of the feel-good parts of life so that they can get through, go through the motions of the trickier times without it completely breaking them apart. I'm pretty sure laughter was the next slide. It was. But going back to music, 7 minutes has a significant positive effect on our mood. So then also thinking, if your child is struggling socially, or they've been bullied, or they're feeling lonely, or they're neurodivergent and they're trying every social skill possible, but they're still really struggling to hit the mark, what we want to remember is, if we start the day in a positive mood, those first 3 minutes of the day with our children and those last 3 minutes of the day with our children really matter, right? When they first wake up, when they last go to bed, that connection and warmth with us, and knowing that we're just so glad they were born. And this is hard. I know, I'm a parent, but where we can, to not immediately go into the corrective aspects of parenting, because there's so many things to correct when they're little. It's like, oh my gosh, where are your socks? Where's your shoe? Why aren't you wearing a uniform? It's not Sunday. All of the things are going on. But if the first thing we say is something that's a correction, you know, we really want our eyes to light up when our children first see us, and to show that we're really just so pleased they're there. So playing positive music, having laughter, having warmth, being delighted in their presence, all these things start to release all the things we need for good brain health, and they really start to strengthen our children's well-being and also their resilience, so that no matter what happens to them in the day, no matter what's going on in the periphery of their life, the most important relationship, which is always with at least one parent or one carer. So when we look at good mental health markers for children, we want to make sure there's at least one adult in their life who is there for them and able to support them. So, and here's some things, of course, you'll get the slide deck afterwards. You'll be able to look over these. Here are some ways that you can do this and support this in your children. Here's a little reminder on how to regulate your own emotions. So you can go back and look over that, because I just wanted to throw those in so that you're able to remember there are strategies to help us keep our cool, because that's a really important of supporting our children to keep their cool and develop those skills. They're going to learn that from watching how we handle discomfort and how we handle challenges socially ourselves. We want to teach our children how to manage their breath, because when you learn how to do those deep, slow breaths, it's actually scientifically shown, this is an example of an MRI scan of a brain, when a person is breathing diaphragmatically, the brain is lit up, you can think straight. When we're stressed and angry, we hold our breath, we get tense, and the brain basically shuts down. So we want to teach our children these emotional regulation skills, and tell them, you know what, when you go to school, you got to go to like with a bunch of kids with different personalities from you, and you're all going to think you're right when you disagree, and that's just part of being a kid. So, honey, it's really important that you just keep practicing how to handle your feelings, because when you get big feelings, you get small thinking, and you're such a wonderful kid. But even wonderful kids will sometimes say and do the things that they regret later. And that's why I want you to learn how to handle those big feelings. And if your kid really naturally struggles with that neurobiologically, it's always worth getting someone to help them. These are teachable skills, and the earlier you learn them, the better. So the 4-7-8 breath is one of my favorite breathing techniques. You breathe in for 4 seconds, you hold for 7, and you breathe out for 8. It's an evidence-based way to bring children down from a state of stress into a state of calm again, so that they can make good decisions. I'm going to have a little look here at the impact of that contagion of emotion. I'll just press play here on this.
In a still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby, who's about a year of age. And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her. This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this. And then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, "Come on, why aren't we doing this?" Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it. They actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing. It's a little like the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is that normal stuff that goes on, that we all do with our kids. The bad is when something bad happens, but the infant can overcome it. After all, when you stop the still face, the mother and the baby start to play again. The ugly is when you don't give the child any chance to get back to the good. There's no reparation, and they're stuck in that really ugly situation.
And, this research has been there for a long time to remind us, that, for a young person, when they're having a difficult time with a friend or even with us, that repair at the end of the challenge is really, really important for them to be able to ask a friend, how can I make it better? I didn't mean to do that. I wasn't thinking, I hope you can forgive me, and teach that repair bit. And it's the same for us in our homes. It's never perfect. There's going to be conflict. There's going to be challenge, but children want to know that people are okay with us. So we want to really support that. Now, this slide is just a little reminder to watch our facial expressions, when our kids come to upset. So it's a little joke about the Botox brow, which is a strategy to just try to keep our foreheads as relaxed as possible, because children can really misinterpret. So sometimes when we're just worried and we sort of do this, they're telling us, they can think, oh my gosh, this thing is even bigger than it is. So just to be aware of that. To remember that we want to support our children to have the 3 C's, which is to find children they can connect with, find a group that they feel that they contribute to, like they really know that I make the group better by being me, and that could be from their kindness, their compassion, and that they feel capable. We want to make sure that our children feel capable of making friends, because friendship is a crucial foundation for them to get along with others. What I'm going to do now, rather than going, because I believe we've been together now for an hour, and I do want to make sure that we touch base on some questions. So what I'll do, I always give half a days of slides so that you've got some extra things to think about. One of these, this is just about making sure we're as affectionate and supportive of our children when they're not doing well as when they are, because sometimes we can give more attention unintentionally at that time. And of course, we're role modeling how to get along and what it is we look for in people. That's all that's about. And the other slides are again going back over what we've talked about. So I'd like to now go back to you, and then we can come back with some final tips around friendship so that I can actually hear. I know that there's already something in the chat, but Lizzie, perhaps I'll get you to navigate this to let me know what the questions are that are coming up. How about that?
Very happy to do that. We don't have any questions as yet.
Okay. Do you want me to keep going while people formulate some questions, go through a few more strategies and things as we go? And then we'll come back.
Oh, Belinda's raised a hand.
Okay. Hi, Linda. Is it Linda?
Belinda. Now,
Belinda. Hi, Belinda.
Belinda and Cheryl, are you able to put your questions in the Q&A chat down the bottom?
The reason this slide's up here, just so you know, this is just when we're talking to our kids, this is a nice little way of talking to them so they'll listen. Okay, so Belinda and Cheryl, far away.
Yes, I've unmuted Cheryl and Belinda.
Okay.
So Cheryl, do you want to go first in asking your
I'll
question?
go first. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. I found it very enlightening. I'm a nan.
Oh, how lovely.
And I think it was really, really, really good. What I loved about it, it's not more a question, it's more a comment, but what I loved about it is what I found. My youngest is now 22, but he has diverse learning needs and had trouble doing friendships. And I loved how you said that the young people can say things and it's not they're not trying to be overly mean. They're not, I'm trying to think of the right word. They're not, I can't think of the right. Anyway, sometimes they're not they're not saying the right thing, or they're being, not being the nicest person they can be.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that they're always going to be like that, and that in the real world, we have to bring up our children to be able to live in the real world. And in the real world, not everyone's their friend. Not everyone thinks that the sun and moon shines out of their eyes like we do. But we have to get them, and even getting them ready for high school. I just love the way that you did your presentation. Bullied, that's the word. Sorry, it's been a long day.
Yeah.
The way that you spoke about the children not being maybe the nicest people they could be, wasn't bullying, where I think a lot of parents and grandparents and nans, because we want to be overprotective, and if we say to the child, oh, this one's being mean to you, oh, are they bullying? Well, the child's going to agree with you, but they mightn't actually be bullying. They can be just not being very nice. So I thank you very much for your words tonight.
Cheryl, I thank you, because you've highlighted some really important points here as well, because you've got this wonderful experience. You're an experienced parent and an experienced grandparent. And so you've also reminded all of us, that where your child's at right now is not where they're going to be in 10 years or 20 years. It's meant to be a bit tricky. They're going to have some struggles. And the other thing I like that you brought up about thank you for sharing about your 22-year-old and that he had some learning difficulties, because I was talking to a school principal last night and she was telling me her gorgeous son, they were expecting that he would say hello back, you know, when people said hello. And, you know, people go hi to him when he was a little boy, and he'd just quickly look down and look away. And they discovered as he got older, he had learning difficulties. And they said to him, you know, sweetie, why don't you say hi back? We've coached you, we've taught you. And he was able to enlighten his mum and tell her, because when people say hi to me, I look down because I have to go through all the names that I know and try to figure out which face matches which name. And that's really common for children with dyslexia and learning difficulties and autism and attention disorders, all of these things. So you've also reminded us that there's so much else that goes on in that background. So I'm really grateful also for your comments, and also for the lovely words you shared. That means a lot to me. So thank you.
We have another question now
Yeah.
from Nikki, and she says, for a child with rejection sensitivity disorder,
Mm.
when and what is the best method or time to interject when I see my daughter struggle? I
Yeah.
am cautious to not over-navigate her friendships, but also want to be conscious to help her navigate healthy relationships and friendships.
Yeah. So one of the questions, you know, and it's so hard because of them, you know, they're meant to hurt when someone rejects them. And when you've got that additional sensitivity, it will really hurt. The most valuable thing we can give in those moments is our empathy and our compassion. And thank you so much for telling me. I'm so glad you told me. That sounds really hard. And what that does is it just helps them soothe and cope with the challenge that little bit more. But you've also raised the point of, we also want to make sure that those friendships are healthy and are good friendships for our children. So one of the things that we can do is you could ask the school, and I'm not sure how old your child is, so I'd love to hear a few more details about them, and also what the rejection sounds like, to see whether it is bullying or whether it's something else, because sometimes it is, and sometimes sensitive children are very much targeted with that sort of thing. But we first always start with empathy. We listen, we try not to add too much information or ask too many questions about who they played with or what happened. We wait for them to come to us and to share those things as well, because they can pick up on our concern. But we also want to ask them, hey, how do you feel? Like, when you think about, like, I think about auntie so-and-so, or I think about so-and-so, when I am, after I've been with them or when I'm with them, I just feel so great. Like, I walk away feeling really energetic and really happy, like I'm walking on sunshine. But, you know, I was thinking back to when I was a little girl, there were some people that when I spent time with them, I just felt sick in the tummy and I felt really uncomfortable. Do you have anyone like that? Or to ask them, you know, who they feel good around, and keep drawing them back to the people they feel really positive around. And also to ask for some support from school. So we work with lots of children who, you know, experience rejection, experience loneliness, a lot of neurodivergent kids who struggle for other reasons, you know, and when we're talking to them, we're always trying to support them to find the people that they do connect with, find the people who are kind to them, find the people that they feel safe and comfortable with. And if it's really hard for them to do that, because we look for similarities in our peer group, we then communicate with the school and ask for the school to help us find other kids. You know, who do you think they're really struggling? You know, are there other kids that have similar values that are really kind and gentle as well, that we can maybe set some plays up with, or set up a play area at school where the more quiet kids or the kids that are struggling, often libraries are a good place for that. Does that help you a little bit with your question? Is there anything you want to add to that?
She has just said that her sensitivity is friendship based and very impacted by children's words. When children choose other games, etc. She's 5. But then Nikki finished by saying, thank you for your advice and session. I have gained so much. We've got another question, which is, if we only have if we have an only child who is shy and wants to be asked to play, how do we give them the confidence to just join in?
Yeah, that's a great question. How old is your child?
We don't know that one yet.
Yeah. Okay. So we know that they're 5 to 12. And shyness is such a tricky thing, isn't it? And it takes time. Often shy children need to observe for a little while. They need to watch social situations. That's where shows like Bluey is so fabulous, right? Bluey, the other show you might know about is Little Lunch. There's a program on ABC, and it's little kids just basically navigating recess and lunch. And pretty much for me, having worked in schools for the last 25 years, most personalities get represented in both of those shows, and there's lots of other ones that you'll come across. Sometimes watching those programs with our children, because shy children, they're hyper vigilant, right? So they use all their brain power, all their energy just to cope with the fact they're in a social situation. So if you think about how big feelings equals small thinking, when you're feeling shy, all of your energy is going into just coping and tolerating with the social situation, which means your thinking has completely shrunk or gone offline. And in those moments, it's really tricky for them to have that confidence to join in. So I always suggest with shy kids, and sometimes it's actually good to get them enrolled in, maybe even some private one-on-one drama. Like for us here in South Australia, on our team, we've deliberately got a professional actor who works on the team. She's also a primary school teacher, but she works with shy kids and coaches them through role play. And of course, because they're one-on-one, they're just practicing role play, and they're practicing social situations outside of a social situation. Whereas once your child is actually with other kids, the emotions start to get big and they can't think straight. But also talking to them outside of that and say, hey, sweetheart, I just want you to know one thing. Do you know you're not the only person? I don't want you to think you're the only person that finds this hard, sweetheart. It's a really tough feeling, isn't it? And you're such a great kid. Like, I know that once you do join in and once people get to know you, there's so much to love about you. And it's okay. It won't always be this hard. So remember that piece for them about optimism. Remind them, you've only been alive for 5 years or 10 years or 12 years, and just give them that comfort and empathy. When they're only children, obviously, there's that additional pressure that you've got, isn't it? It's so much harder because they haven't sort of just had that practice at home all the time. So they've got shyness on top of not having that. But I have no doubt they would be exposed to lots of other opportunities, and that in time, this will come. They just might need a little bit more time. And really tuning into all those great storybooks that are out there that talk about kids who are struggling with their feelings, who are struggling with shyness, and start coaching them and supporting them. Often we also see with shy children that sometimes they've got some hidden anxiety. Anxiety is a very common childhood challenge. And if your child does have anxiety, early childhood is a time when it's really particularly treatable, because anxiety tends not to go away without some intervention and some support from psychology or counselling or teaching or the wellbeing people at school. So I also think, I don't know your child, but I also think if you've got a bit of an inkling, and parental gut's an amazing thing. We know our beautiful children so well. If your gut's going, I think they're a bit anxious, it's really worth trying to see somebody to coach them with some strategies on how to manage anxiety, because then they'll feel empowered, they'll know how to cope, and then they won't use all of their energy just trying to cope with the fact they're in a room. I'd also suggest you get early to things, you get there early to different functions with people. I'm trying to think if we've got free resources. We've got this big picture book, which is one of the books that I've written, which is Archie's Big Picture Book. And it's like 16 stories about this kid who just struggles with his feelings. And one of the lessons are on joining in. But there's lots of material like out there on the internet, shows like Bluey. So I just encourage you, get there early, prepare them beforehand, tell them you've got a plan, sweetheart. It's okay to stand with me for a bit longer. And also, I know there's lots of other questions popping up. Teach them to watch for a bit, because sometimes children will go in and they'll say, can I play? And sometimes the kids will go, no. And that's not necessarily because they're being mean. Like Cheryl said, it could be, no, we're in the middle of it. You can in a sec, but I don't have great social skills yet because I've only been alive for 6 years, and I don't realise that this is coming across hard, and a sensitive child will feel it so much more, the poor loves. So just think about that kind of thing, that observe, that blend in, that just sitting next to them, that offering a compliment. But again, you coach these things outside of the context. I often show the slide, when someone's drowning is not the time to give swimming lessons. And sometimes, they're standing there and they don't want to try. It's like, it's okay, honey, you just go and ask them if you can. And they're just like, I am frozen by my amygdala right now. I can't make a decision. So we want to talk about these things in the background, and sometimes getting therapeutic intervention can help. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, and Madhavi, she did say that her child is 8. So, but I think
Yeah.
would apply to around that group.
Yeah,
So
100%.
another question that we have from an anonymous attendee is, when do solid friendships start developing? Is it different for boys and girls?
Yeah, I love this question. First of all, it is so personal, okay? So we remember with our children, chronological age and developmental age are very different things. So sometimes an 8-year-old might have the social emotional maturity of a 3 or 4-year-old. And that's a really variable thing. And then eventually, like I said to you earlier, our kids aren't stuck here. Early childhood is practice for adulthood. They're practicing becoming the person they're going to be one day. So it's okay that there's these developmental differences. When we look at a toddler, toddlers developmentally, they'll just kind of do their own thing in their own head. And about 3 or 4, they'll start doing the same thing next to each other. And then around 4 and 5, we start to see a more cooperative play. But up until about 8, you kind of can just be friends with someone because you both like the color blue, or because you both like a particular football team, or because you both play a particular sport. And friendships are really simple. And when we start to see some of the challenges between children tend to start to emerge around year 3 and 4, because friendships start to become more solid, more meaningful. They start to be more about shared values and sort of really feeling deeply connected and being able to take on, empathy gets much better around 8. Kids are still egocentric for a bit longer, but remember, until you're 25, the brain's got a fair bit of work to do. And then they become teenagers and they're like stinky toddlers because the brain goes through a whole rewiring. But you don't have to worry about that yet, because all your kids are under 12 here tonight. And it'll be fine. It actually is fine and great. But, with those solid relationships, they start to really start showing up in those middle primary. But remember this too, some kids just take longer. I work with young people who are just utterly divine, lovely people, but they're just really struggling to find their people. Sometimes at your school or in your community, they're not their people, or you get a year level that just there's a bit of values clash or personality clashes, or just not finding their group, which is why they might take a lot longer, and their very best friend doesn't happen until they're in trade school or in their first job or at uni. And that's also happens for some people. But we just want to make sure that our children feel a sense of belonging at school, even if it's just with one kid, and a sense of belonging in their community. So that could be, one community I think works so beautifully is Scouts, because it's such an inclusive, open thing, and they're always just doing stuff. So that for the kids, they're just doing that parallel play, which is really easy. So friendships sort of really start to get, much deeper in the teenage years. And then obviously in the adult years, we've got much better perspective. But hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you. We've got another question from an anonymous attendee, and they've had a bit of a hard day. So it says, my son is a deep thinker, very smart, yet very sensitive. He is in year 2 and is struggling with friendships. Most boys in his class are all younger siblings, whereas my son is the eldest. I know he would tend to exaggerate some things. However, he does struggle with unkind friends. Just today, one child said to my boy, not in front of me, yet in my presence, I'm going to make you cry so hard. How do I navigate this? My sweet boy is often hysterical, and he says he doesn't want to be there. He is 7.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that with all of us tonight. And that's a really heartbreaking and difficult situation to be in. And that's the kind of situation where I would be asking for support from your school. So I would be letting them know, and remember this when you're communicating with your child's teacher, be very specific about what's happened. We don't want to just say, he's being bullied, the kids are being mean to him on purpose. We actually want to give specific, so you gave me a very specific example, which made it really clear in my head that they know he's sensitive. They know that if they push him enough, that his sweet little face is going to give evidence it's worked. And kids will do this. They will, particularly kids who are struggling with their own stuff, will use other kids sometimes, it's not most of the time, but some of the time, as a way to alleviate their own stress. So I will dump my emotional pain onto you. And when you are sad, then I'm not the only one who's sad. Now, that doesn't mean we go, well, that's okay. You know, if that helps another child feel better, it's your kid and you need to protect them and advocate for them. So that's when I would be. But in terms of with your child, we still want to listen and say, oh, sweetheart, that sounds really, really hard and you didn't deserve that at all. You have the kindest, most beautiful heart, and we are here to listen anytime. But we don't then make a commentary about the other kid or about the situation, because that can increase their anxiety and stress levels, because we want them to feel brave enough to still go back into school and be there. But I would be contacting his teacher and letting them know this is what was said, and I would love some support to get some space for him. So can we make sure they're not sitting on the same table all the time? Can you just keep an eye on them in the yard, and can you keep an ear out and maybe have a little, you know, teachers are pretty amazing in junior primary. They're really good at talking through, you know, being kind and treating each other well. And I would keep an eye on that one. And certainly, even though, you know, in year 2, kids are socially clumsy, you know, coming up and frightening your child with, I'm going to make you cry so hard, you know, and it makes me worry about that kid who's saying stuff like that too, isn't it? Like you think, oh, where have they heard that? What's going on for that kid? But, you know, my response is for your child. I'm here for your child. So I would be alerting the school to that one. I hope that's a helpful answer for you.
The next question that we have is, my 11-year-old daughter has a friendship group of 3 and often feels left out when the other 2 pair off. How do we navigate this?
I hate triads. We've got to get a 4th kid or help your child just find another group, right? And the reason is this: in a triad, this is very, and you said your daughter was 11, is that right? Did I remember that right, Lizzie?
Yes.
Did she say 11? Yeah. So in a triad, triads are the worst, right? They're the absolute worst, particularly in girls' friendship circles. Oh, yeah. And previous that question about, do girls and boys navigate it differently? I'll come back to that. Please remind me if I forget. But often in girls, because they tend to, like the boys tend to do stuff together, right? So they go and kick the ball. They, you know, go and pretend to be spies. They act out their Minecraft. They build a fort. The girls tend to sit down and have a long, lengthy conversation about whatever it is they're talking about, right? And I know I'm generalizing, but we know that this tends to happen. Triads are so tricky, right? Because there'll always be someone on the top, and then there'll be 2 other people that are desperate to make sure that person on the top includes them. But because at 11 and between 8 and 11, they're reaching this stage of individuation, everybody wants to be on the top, right? Because everyone needs social position. So triads are really, really tricky, because what happens is that most powerful person will pick one because they want to assert their social position, and they quite like having the other 2 people kind of looking to them and not wanting to be left out. So even though everyone would rather be the person on the top, usually there's a dominant player. And so we want to really support your daughter and just say, do you know that in the science of friendships, and actually all the scientists that study friendships, they actually know that a triad, which is 3 people in a group, can usually lead to lots of different kinds of problems. So sometimes it can actually be better to see if there's a 4th person that can be included. And sometimes that person on the top does not like that because they love the social position of being at the top of the rung. But we always recommend it's always better to be a 2 or a 4 than a 3. So again, it might be an opportunity to just chat and say, look, she's really struggling with this triad. They go off, you know, the other person's kind of owning the other kid and doesn't want the other kid to relate to me because, of course, they're wanting to keep their social position high. Any ideas, you know, when you look at the group in the class, is there anyone else that our daughter can maybe start looking to form a friendship with? Maybe you have that child over, or you have some kind of interaction with them, you know, make friends with their parent, just see what you can do to strengthen that on the periphery for your child. That's always a tough one. And even just telling your kid it's a tough one and that they're not alone, and that every kid in the world in a triad will, if you're not the top person that's making all the decisions, you know, they're struggling, and that this is a really normal thing. So that whole normalization, and then help them find a one-on-one friendship or a friendship with 4. I hope that's helpful.
And Madhavi, on that, when there are those struggles with between friends, are the parents better off to talk to the school or to the parent of the other child involved
Yeah.
if they know the parent?
Yeah, that's such a good question, isn't it? That's always a tricky one, isn't it, folks? Because it depends on the relationship you have with that other parent. So if you've got a good relationship with that other parent, just go in really neutral. So you just say, hey, look, I think our girls or our sons are having a bit of trouble. And I just love your kid to bits. And what do you reckon we should do? Are they coming home and they're talking about stuff? Because they're both going to have their own perspective. Where it can sometimes go wrong is parents can get so defensive that they'll then start actively seeking ways to show that it's your kid that's the problem and not their kid. So it's a bit of a sensitive thing. I always like, if there's stuff going on, it doesn't hurt to just touch base and say, I just wanted to let you know that my child's not feeling great about coming to school, or their well-being seems to be down at the moment, or they're having trouble sleeping, or they've been crying a lot, or they're really upset. And I know kids have trouble with friendships, but we'd really love some support around this because they're really having a difficult time and we're worried about them. I would be more likely to touch base, but again, it depends on the school, it depends on the teacher. You know, all of these things have so many variations, but I don't think our children should be doing any of this stuff on their own. If they come and tell us, that's a really good thing. So if they're coming and telling you about how they're feeling, that in itself is a stress relief. We just want to make sure, particularly for our dear sons, because often they bottle this stuff up and it mulls over and over in their head, and sometimes we don't know what's actually going on and what they're struggling with. So we want to make sure they're talking to somebody. And then I think you use your judgment. I just think we have to some degree err on the side of caution when we're approaching other parents, because some of them misunderstand it, and we're kind of neurobiologically hardwired to take our kids' side over things. So that can sometimes lead to ugly things that can make it worse for our kids when we get involved in their conflict in a more obvious kind of way. Sometimes what that can mean, like sometimes I'll recommend to parents, I think you need to let, the school know that this child's being really mean, but I wouldn't recommend a restorative conference with these kids, because the child who's being mean on purpose, or the child that's bullying, is actually going to use that as ammunition against your child, and your child's going to have an even worse time at school. So hopefully that helps you sort of just see a framework. And again, your parenting gut is really, really important here. But we've got to always be careful about getting involved directly, because once adults get involved with children's problems, we're using our adult brain, our adult perception, our adult understanding about something that's happening for a 7-year-old or a 12-year-old. And we can get it wrong, but also then if we've got a parent who's not particularly good at handling these things, they might start whinging to their kid about your kid and you. Excuse me. And then suddenly there's all of this drama going on and it's made things worse. I hope that helps.
And Madhavi, another question is, what do you do if you think your child might be the bully?
Yeah, and this happens. Thank you for that one, because sometimes it will be your child that said the social, emotionally clumsy things. Look, when children are bullying, there's a couple of reasons why. They could be really struggling at school. So sometimes I see hidden learning difficulties. So I always look for why. Why would a child that's been raised with values, as I'm sure you have, that has beautiful parents, involved parents, why would my kid be doing that? And often what we find is hidden. Do you remember that slide about the expectation gap and hidden under the surface behaviors? I often find the kids who are bullying are struggling themselves. So they're struggling with their learning, or they're struggling with fitting in. They're struggling with their social skills. Sometimes they're struggling with their impulse control. So they get the thought, we all get the thought, right? We see stuff, we get the thought, but then we hold the thought. Whereas sometimes when kids struggle with impulse control, they just blurt it out and they say the thing and it sounds like bullying. It's not, they're just making an observation. But if your child might be bullying, I think it's really, really important to check in with them and ask them, hey, sweetie, are you okay? Because you're just like the kindest kid. I love you so much and I'm on your side. And I've noticed that you've been saying some things that are really hurting other kids, and that's just not who you are. So remember, we always go in with empathy first, or like in this slide that we're on at the moment is a really good way to go in warmly and supportively to get more information and ask. Just remember, they'll get very defensive very quick, because no one wants to be bad. Like, all the kids I work with who are bullies, they're still great kids. They're nice kids. They're kids who are struggling and having a hard time. So we want to make sure we set the bar really high in our homes. So you've already done that. And then we just keep going back to, in our family, we try really hard to be kind. In our family, we imagine that any person could be having the worst day of their life, and we want to make sure we don't add to that. But darling, you're young, and I know that you're still learning. So when we make mistakes, we make sure we make things better. So you're just really expressing your values, but then doing a little dig around under the surface. And ask teachers, they're really good observers of what's going on around them as well. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. We might just finish up now with the last questions.
Sure.
And it is, what happens when your child has a friend that they want to have play dates with and the other parents do not play along? As in, will continuously say they are too busy, even though the kids know they do play dates with others. How do you explain this to your child?
Yeah, that's so hard, isn't it? And again, that kind of signals that, those parents are either just too busy, or for whatever reason, they're only focusing on, a particular handful of friends. That's a really, really tough one. And again, we can't, I always tell kids, it's so hard, isn't it, that we can't control other people's behavior. We can't control the way other people talk and include us, but we can control ourselves and how we show up in the world. And sometimes, no matter how kind you are to someone or how much you like someone, that friendship isn't for them, but you don't take it personally, darling. It doesn't mean you're a bad friend. It doesn't mean you're not an interesting person. For some of us, we're not for everybody, and that's a hard thing to learn, a really painful thing. And I think I'm actually thinking back to, being a kid, growing up in the 70s and the 80s, and there were families at the school that, didn't have brown people in the house, right? And so kids would go, I really want you to come to my birthday party, but we're not allowed to have brown people in the house. So I was actually remembering back to that as a kid, and I was trying to remember how I got through that. And I think my parents just reminded me, just stick to my values, to not take it personally, and to continue to sort of show up in a way that is harmless. That it's that support for pain, isn't it? It's really, when we're sad, sometimes there isn't a fix and sometimes there isn't an explanation, but our compassion and our empathy can sometimes help our children cope. And I think, one of the crucial skills for social emotional well-being, resilience and happiness is being able to cope. Sometimes life really does suck. Sometimes people treat us really badly and really unfairly. But having that, I can cope, I have a plan, there are other people that will have me over, remembering the external social communities that we can start connecting our children with, sometimes that's all we can do. I hope that helps.
Wonderful, thank you. So I'm just mindful that the time is now 8:32. Madhavi, it's been so wonderful to have you. Did you just want to finish up with a summary on these last few slides I think you mentioned? And then
absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Absolutely. It's been such a pleasure. So this is just to remind you just of what the juggle is like, isn't it? It's such a big thing, raising a family. To practice gratitude, with our children, because we have this negativity bias. We have a natural tendency to think about what's wrong in our life, think about the friendships that aren't working. So we know gratitude practice can neurologically wire our brain in a way that is different. Remember, we're going to be authentic. Our children don't need us to be perfect, and we just repair things. We remember the real-time talk. Remember when we were kids, we talk on the phone, you can hear the tone. So if your children are using devices, try to get them to do a FaceTime more than a text. So just a reminder on that point. Some of these things, again, this is all just summaries. So you're going to get copies of these slides as a PDF if you want them. But these are just reminders of the things that we need to build that foundation. We remember that friendship skills take time, folks, all right? Your children are not at the end of the line. They have all of early childhood and teenagehood to practice how to get along with people. So give it time, stay confident and be aware to that. Help your kids be open to friendships, keep them be open to different personalities, develop these skills and just be there to offer that guidance. We're almost done. And help them with things like don't tell them to ask, can I play, which we've covered. Don't let them talk to peers like they talk to adults, because we want them to learn to talk at that same level, and we don't want them to go into retaliation mode either. The rest of the slides, I believe, are very, very self-explanatory. I don't think there's anything there. That's for the triad mum who asked me the question. We want our kids to like as much as possible. With bullying, it's when it's repetitive, they've been asked to stop, it's unwanted, and they're doing it intentionally on purpose to be mean. So that's when we want intervention done. We've talked about this as well. And I'll take you to my very, very last slide. This one's a good one for you to just go over as a template, but you'll have time to go to this very last slide. If you want to stay in touch, you'll see that little QR code come up on your screen, and that's where our free resources are. So, and also social media. So I always try to post tips to help parents. So please feel free to join the Positive Minds community there, and also feel free to download away and take some of those free resources, and my books and things are there on the website as well. So all I hope is that there's been at least one or two things that have been useful to you. So I wish you all the very best.